You're here for information, which means you probably want some answers. And one of the things that I like to do on this channel is take the previous week's videos and take some of the comments that were posted on those videos throughout the course of the week and compile them into a list so that I can answer questions and answer comments the following week in a nice format like this. Now, full disclaimer, there are hundreds, thousands of comments. I can't get to all of them. So what I do is I pick the ones that seem to be the most common, or at least the most interesting, and then I answer them. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to lead off with the first video from last week, which was, do you have adrenal fatigue? The top 3 causes. So this video was all about what causes adrenal fatigue, where basically your adrenals just get shot and don't produce as much of the cortisol, and everything just gets a little whacked out. So Dimitar Dimitrov says, some people say that coffee messes up your adrenals. Explain to me why. When I ditched my coffee, my anxiety went away and I slept way better. Did I have high cortisol? You didn't necessarily have high cortisol. What was going on was that the caffeine was encouraging your adrenal glands to produce more of those catecholamines, more adrenaline, more noradrenaline, more epinephrine and norepinephrine, So what that means is that they were getting burned out. So yeah, when you reduce that, you reduce the catecholamines, you reduce the load on the adrenals. Niko Kritikos says, can you build muscle in a calorie deficit if you're doing keto, fasting, and getting enough protein? I know it's a little bit off topic, but it's a common question. Purely put, if you're in a deficit, it's hard to build muscle. But like I always say, what is your deficit? Is your deficit an hour? Is your deficit 24 hours? Is your deficit a week? Because you could be in a deficit over the course of a week, but have one day where you're in a caloric surplus where you built muscle that one day. So it all depends on how you look at it. Phua Ann Lih says, in some videos you say to never combine fats and carbs and eat them separately. But how do you do it? For example, if you eat either one first, or how long you should wait before you eat the other? You know, generally speaking, it's not a cardinal rule, but I do think it's pretty important. And I do think that an hour and a half, 2 hours, your glucagon levels start to come back up, insulin levels start to drop down, you're okay to eat one or the other. So if you eat fats, you can have carbs 30 minutes later. But if you eat carbs, you shouldn't really have fats for about an hour and a half, in my opinion. Now, some will argue this. Some definitely say that you can have them together. But it's kind of old school stuff that when you spike your insulin, fat can go into storage. Okay, so Judy Banks says, how does age figure into all this, i.e. hormones, etc.? What modifications, if any, should be made at different decades? You know, when you're older, it's more important to add salt to your diet. I know it's the opposite of what people typically think, but by adding salt to your water in the morning, you're going to give your adrenals a break. You have a lot more years of stress and damage, potential damage, on your adrenals. Okay? Adrenal fatigue is kind of a weird term. Realistically, it's adrenal insufficiency. It's the inability of your adrenals to keep up. They're not really tired. They're a little burnt out in terms of how they produce things. So fatigue is kind of a meh term. It's more about insufficiency. So the way that you can make it more sufficient is by taking the load off of the adrenals. And you can't always reduce your stress. That's just not always practical. And a lot of times as you get older, your stress levels increase. So the best thing that you can do is start combating what is affecting the adrenals. So allow some salt into the diet so that it can actually help boost up the blood pressure so the cortisol doesn't have to do it as much. I actually did a whole separate video explaining on the solutions, so I'll post that up soon. Lisa says, is adrenal fatigue related to high emotional stress in the central nervous system? Yes and no. It's not necessarily about the central nervous system per se, but it is related to high emotional stress. If you have a lot of stress, you're going to have a high adrenaline response, period. Slimland says, how do you know if you're in autophagy? That's a good question. Quite honestly, you'd have to have a test done. You test what are called autophagosomes. So no real way to tell just by walking around. Okay, the next video, are evening workouts better for performance? Okay, so this was a video that talked about how working out in the evening is actually good if you're trying to just get stronger but not looking for as much of a body composition change. Working out in the morning is better if you're looking for fat loss. So some good questions here. The GTE channel says, some argue that you burn more fat after the workout when you train in a fed state. So that is more beneficial long term. What's your take on that science? Kind of missing that point of view. So the argument there is that you're going to be able to train harder if you're fed. So therefore, meaning you're going to have a post-exercise oxygen debt effect that allows you to burn more fat after the workout. It's not that big of a difference. I think the fact that you actually burn more fat during your fasted workouts ends up being a lot more effective than trying to bank on post-exercise oxygen debt and the calorie consumption or calorie burn that occurs there, Owen Thompson says, great video. I'm wondering, I have type 2 diabetes. When I work out in the morning, my blood sugar spikes to 200 sometimes in the high 200s in a fasted state. So I started working out in the evening. I would rather work out in the morning for many reasons. So I was wondering what your thoughts would be on the time of working out. I think you're still good to work out in the morning. I think it's going to help drive your blood glucose down and help allow your body to utilize that a little bit better. You have high blood sugar right now. You might develop a little bit of peripheral insulin resistance when you train in a fasted state, which means your blood glucose might go higher for a little bit of time. But I think over time, you're going to get more adapted. Obviously, anyone with any medical condition, you really should just ask your doctor, but I fully understand you're probably not getting the information from them, which is why you ask me here. I just have to answer with a grain of salt. Gustavo Sanchez says, will or rather should ketogenic diets lower the blood sugar for healthy people as well? Is it normal for people under ketosis to stay on the lower end of the healthy blood sugar level or on the higher end? Why did my blood sugar increase by 3 points after doing fasted weightlifting training? Where's the sugar coming from? Okay, so I talked about this recently because I discovered it in my bone broth fast, but what happens is when you're working out, your body is dumping glycogen in the form of glucose in your bloodstream. So totally normal to see an increase in blood sugar there. Shortly thereafter, it should go down. Now, additionally, you talk about your blood sugar increasing, where is it coming from, like overall with a fast. Same kind of thing. Basically, your body is now using fats. So the glucose that does come into your system for some needs, like for the brain, is going to be elevated because it's not being used by other cells. It's only being used by the brain. Basically, if you had, let's say, 100 points, your glucose was 100, and your whole body was using it, you'd be easier to get down lower. But all of a sudden, you're fasting, and the only thing that needs glucose is your brain. So that means your ability to burn that glucose is a lot less because the only thing that needs it is your brain. So the amount in your blood stays higher. Inglorious Roman says, hi, Thomas, is there a recommended time to do a workout after waking up? For example, I wake up at 4 a.m., warm up, and do my workout around 4:15. Yeah, I would try to give it an hour if you can. That doesn't mean get up at 3. I mean, I know it's not always practical, but if you can push your workout back a little bit, it allows the hormones to kind of balance out a little bit. Frank Osei says, so does that mean that 1 rep max sessions in the morning are okay? Yeah, totally. There's nothing wrong with that at all, as long as you obviously warm up. Okay, the next video was the immune system and muscle growth, understanding insulin growth factor 1, so IGF-1. Interesting video. I did this video talking about colostrum, and a lot of people gave me beef on calling it colostrum instead of colostrum, potato. It doesn't really matter. I've always called it colostrum. It's just how you pronunciate it, so who cares? Anyway, so there's a video talking about muscle growth, how IGF works, and how colostrum plays into that. So Josiah Haynes says, I've seen a few conflicting studies, some saying that colostrum causes cancer and some saying it helps fight cancer. It's kind of neither. High amounts of IGF-1 will grow cancer cells. Yes, just like if you were to take growth hormone while you had cancer, it's going to increase IGF, it's going to grow the cancer. So it's not going to give you cancer, but if you have existing cancer and you're loading up a ton of IGF, it could cause it to grow. I think the small amount that comes from colostrum and stuff like that is negligible though. Lee 3000 says, hello, will 3 grams of CVIT, assuming you mean vitamin C, and 10 milligrams iodine in the morning stop your fasting state? I want to take it early and not wait for my eating window. It's not going to stop your fast, no, but it is going to diminish some of the antioxidant capabilities of your fast simply because now you're giving it an exogenous antioxidant rather than relying on the body to form its own antioxidants. So just be cognizant of that. Okay, Little Voice says, how does IGF-1 impact skin aging? How can we optimize this to keep the skin looking young? There are some studies that look at this, but I'm not super familiar with them. But it is interesting. Yes, IGF-1, growth hormone, all grows skin and soft tissue very, very well. So I would imagine it has a powerful effect. Professor Duck says, what effect does fasting and keto have on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis? I've read a lot of people saying that keto messes up your hormones, your testosterone, thyroid, cortisol. Can you explain or refute this? The studies that I've seen says that keto tends to balance out your hormones, simply because a lot of the steroid hormones in your body, cholesterols, hormones that are built on cholesterol, like testosterone and stuff like that, they require these fats. So you usually see a balance. You might get a little bit whacked out with your adrenals for a while, but generally speaking, you're going to be in good shape. So I don't know where you're hearing that. I think it's probably all just the anti-keto kind of naysayers out there. Kino says, you mentioned it in the other video, but could you extend on a strategy for your calorie surplus with high mTOR, but weekly lower calories idea? Since muscle building typically happens 24 to 48 hours after the workouts, is this when you would time meals? In short, yes, I just did a video on the keto bulk and explaining all this, but in short, this is exactly what it is. You want to just time your calories along with your bigger workouts and then restrict other days. You want to just time your higher amounts of calories during protein synthesis. You got it. Carbs post-workout and the targeted ketogenic diet. All right, so this one was interesting. I think it confused a lot of people. First and foremost, this video was all about a targeted ketogenic diet. If you're deep in keto, you don't need to do this. I did this video to help people out in terms of giving them a solution for being able to time their carbs if they want to add carbs post-workout or pre-workout if they really want to apply it. So Bethany B says, can you give us an example of what you would do post-workout with this method? I've been having issues with muscle fatigue and not recovering, and I'm thinking this is the problem. Perfect timing for this video. Thank you. I'm not living keto for losing weight, but mental clarity and other benefits. Perfect example would be like a quarter to a half a cup of blueberries, okay, then probably like 2 corn tortillas, no gluten, and some pea protein. That'd be perfect. Perfect combination, and then a little bit later, add your fats, maybe an hour and a half later. Dia Viona says, okay, so this approach will allow to boost the performance during a workout, but how effective is it for building muscle? Is this the better way for getting muscle, or the result just the same as someone who's in hardcore keto? I don't know, because the research didn't really look at that. I would imagine that if it allows you to get a little bit more recovery, then ultimately your muscle building effect is going to be stronger. But if you are kicking yourself out of keto, then you are temporarily being, you have an obstruction to that leucine oxidation blocking benefit that you get from keto. Normally, keto is going to block leucine from oxidizing. The moment you break that, you can go into a catabolic state. So it's a wash. Do you want the extra performance and potential risk of muscle loss, or do you just want to stay keto and have your safety barrier? That's the way you got to look at it. Emola said, you had said in an earlier video that fructose can only be stored as liver glycogen and not as muscle glycogen. Is this still true? So kind of. So what ends up happening, what the science is showing with this, is that when you consume carbohydrates and fructose, it goes through a process of getting converted into lactate, and then the liver has the ability to take that lactate and convert it into a more usable form of glucose. So in essence, with this method, you could be able to take the glucose from the liver and actually have it restore muscle glycogen, in theory. So what's happening is you're just making the process more efficient, making it so that you have an available glucose. So the fructose probably does still go to the liver, but the liver might be able to essentially, in effect, donate some of its glycogen into other areas. Nasir Shimoni says, great hack, man. I just wanted to ask about consuming beans for someone on a vegan keto diet. Are they good to go? Because I need them as a protein source. You don't need them as a protein source. You can get by with a lot less protein, just have a little bit of a pea protein shake. You could probably get by with 75 grams of protein per day and be just fine. Trust me. So the beans are okay in a small amount as long as they're not getting you out of keto, but it's not necessary. Jamie Alvarez says, is it possible to use this method with intermittent fasting? I work out during my fasting period. Yeah, as long as when you break your, you'd be breaking your fast when you eat this. So it's not like you could continue fasting. So if you intermittent fast and then you train at the end of your fast, you could break your fast and your post-workout meal with this method. That'd be perfect. David Ray says, do you recommend leucine with keto and a 16-8 fast? Nope, don't need it. You preserve a lot of leucine. That's the whole idea. Keto and intermittent fasting, which produces ketones, beta-hydroxybutyrate, ends up blocking leucine oxidation by 18 to 41%, meaning 18 to 41% less muscle breakdown, so no need to take leucine. The next video, the Thomas DeLauer Recommended Products Big Holiday Thank You. This was a video that I did with all of my sponsors, or most of my sponsors from 2018, just to give them a big shout out, but also to give everyone a good price on these things. I had the usual haters in this video, people that were upset that there were sponsors. And I need to say, like I say in every single video, if it wasn't for the sponsors, I wouldn't be able to have this channel. So first and foremost, if you have any issues with that, I highly recommend you unsubscribe, because that's just not how I can be. I can't afford to keep this channel going without sponsors. So they're going to be there. Sponsors are always people that I reach out to first. Okay, so it's usually a combination of me reaching out to them because I use their product and then us coming to a deal that works for the channel. So Justin Swenson says, you mentioned breaking your fast with bone broth. Is it just as good to break your fast with collagen peptides? Would I still get the same benefits? It's a good question. With bone broth, it's just a little bit easier to palate and it's a little bit easier to digest. Sometimes collagen peptides are a little hard to break down right out the gate. So yeah, you'd be okay, but I do think that bone broth would be a little bit better. Rubicon V says, what do you think of sunflower seed butter versus other nut butters, including macadamia nut? P.S. I eat macadamia nuts, but I want to add a different butter. Sunflower seed butter is good. Just try to go for an organic one and be careful because there's usually a lot of sugar in them. Other nut butters, macadamia nut butter is awesome. Walnut butter is really good, but it's hard to find. Pistachio nut butter is a little higher carb, but it's also good too. So yeah, rotate them all out. Just try not to go for peanut butter. All right, you guys, that wraps up today's Q&A for this last week. So the videos that are up this week, if you post your comments, then I can do my best to get them into a video or at least reply to them. So as always, keep it locked in, and I'll see you in the next one.